As soon as the 3 days Arthur had agreed to with Stannis were up, Stannis wasted no time. On the evening of the third day, he left the castle and returned to his cabin aboard the Fury. Quentyn's search of Dragonstone had turned up no dragon eggs, and Cletus had likewise found no prostitutes on the island. Arthur had sent Jimmy and Zack into the fishing village and port to buy provisions. They came back with many eggs, seagull eggs and chicken eggs alike. They couldn't hatch dragons, but they would help the food stores for the voyage. The royal fleet passed through the gullet, rounded the Cape of Eagles, and sailed north along the coast in calm weather. With nothing pressing to do, Arthur fulfilled a knight's duty to his squire, taking Penrose up on deck for sword practice. "Keep your back straight when you swing," he said. "That's the most basic thing. When an opponent is taller and more agile than you, a rash attack won't win it. Watch and measure him. And keep your wrist loose when you strike, so he can't read your blows." Their sparring drew the crew's attention. Many gathered on deck to watch and try to learn a move or two from the Sword of the Morning. The fleet put into Shipbreaker Bay and docked at Tarth to take on water and victuals. Compared to Dragonstone, Tarth was breathtaking. Mountains, lakes, waterfalls, and a blanket of green that covered the island. High peaks cut off storms from the narrow sea, and the western harbor was a well-sheltered haven for Stormland's ships. "Arthur, you must let me show you proper hospitality for a few days, for your help before," Lord Selwyn told him when he received Arthur and his company in Evenfall Hall. The welcome was unusually warm, and a lavish feast followed. Arthur had brought Lord Selwyn 100,000 gold dragons in revenue, and the lord could not hide his gratitude. The warehouses and logistics system set up on Tarth by Vicwood and his associate Vic Six had made the island far more competitive in trade, and the hall's kitchens had prepared dishes from the free cities that were a world away from the bread, sausages, and salted beef the men had grown used to on shipboard. Lord Selwyn's smile never left his face. He toasted Arthur repeatedly. When the feast wound down, he announced for all to hear, "I will see that all the food stores on your ships are properly supplied. You need not worry about provisions." Both Stannis and Imry, who had attended the feast, exchanged astonished looks at Arthur's influence. Arthur also met his old squire Vicwood again. The next morning, the two of them walked to a 2-meter-high wall not far from the harbor that enclosed a large yard of warehouses and storerooms. Vicwood had a storeroom opened. "Thanks to Lord Selwyn's support, we secured a stretch of land outside the port to build these warehouses, and he gave us tax relief," he said. The storeroom was neat and well organized. Most of the contents were fine tapestries from Lys and patterned carpets from Myr. Other warehouses held handicrafts from Lys, Myr, and Tyrosh, and bottles of local vintage wine. "This place sits near the stepstones and is close to Lys, Myr, and Tyrosh," Vicwood explained. "The harbor here seldom lies rough, so Braavosi captains are happy to transfer cargo and take on stores. We stack provisions and sell them to captains who call here, and we move these goods onward to Stormland's lords and Westerosi merchants. The profits are considerable." Arthur examined the ledgers and saw the truth in Vicwood's words. He then asked, "What of Zahn in Braavos? How is your father Victa? Any word from them?" Since Arthur's arrival in Starfall, he had paid little attention to business in Braavos, and once the Arbor fleet blockaded the city, communications had been cut. Vicwood shrugged. "Overall, things are stable. On warehousing, besides our new yards on Tarth, Zahn struck a deal with the Night's Watch to open a storehouse at Eastwatch by the Sea. They resell grain and cloth with the Watch and with wildling traders, and they collect furs, ivory, and quality timber. The shipping side has also grown. A fleet of more than 30 ocean-going merchantmen now sails under our interests. Insurance has expanded alongside the warehouses. It can't dominate like it once did in the north, but it's taken hold in several free cities." He went on, "In Braavos, the swordsmen and assassins now generally certify with the Swordsmen's Guild to qualify for different grades of blades, Snow Seal, Peach Seal, Black Mamba, and the like. A certified swordsman is more trusted and often commands higher pay. With all these lines expanding, we're short of reliable hands, so Zahn has contracts with several mercenary companies. The closest is a group called the Wolf Pack." Vicwood told the Wolf Pack's story. It was a mercenary company mostly made up of northerners, its origins reaching back to the Dance of the Dragons. When winter came hard north of the Neck, deep snow, bitter wind, the North's spare men had been gathered and marched south under Lord Cregan Stark as the Winter Wolves to join the wars. They sought glory, adventure, plunder, and, if fate called it, an honorable death. By the time they reached the fighting, the war had ended. Many of those soldiers could not go home. To return would bring hardship to families and risk famine. So many stayed in the riverlands, and others formed bands to cross the narrow sea and earn gold. To this day, when winter presses down in the north, men who are spare to their households cross to the south and swell the ranks of the wolf pack. The company remains largely northern in its composition. Arthur listened. The wolf pack numbered about 800 now. Though he rarely meddled in Braavos affairs, the size and potential of the company interested him. He wrote to Zahn, after a long silence, and instructed him to deepen cooperation with the wolf pack. If the opportunity presented itself, bring the entire company under Zahn's control. Then use the wolf pack to recruit further in the north and expand its numbers. Dorne, the Water Gardens. Your Highness, would you like a cup of milk of the poppy? Maester Caliot asked, shading Prince Dorne from the sun beneath a lemon tree. He had just examined the prince's increasingly swollen limbs and pronounced them to be gout. It may ease the pain. No need, not these few days. Dorne watched the children splashing in the pond with a quiet, faraway look. Any news from King's Landing or from Quentyn? Maester Caliot folded a silk blanket over the prince's knees, aware of the slight wince that crossed Dorne's face. He straightened and spoke with the care of one who had seen far worse. Quentyn writes that Paxter Redwyne lost his trial by combat and was beheaded before the great sept of Baelor. Sir Arthur has been appointed governor of the Dorne borderlands by the Iron Throne and has already sailed south under the royal fleet's escort. He promises to meet your highness when the fleet reaches Sunspear. A flicker of surprise crossed Dorne's face. Eddard Stark going south meant the Riverlands would fall, but I had not expected such a thorough loss. To name him Dorne Borderlands governor and grant him a royal escort, Caliot said. Lord Jon Arryn has clearly set this in motion. Your Highness, now that Sir Arthur has defeated Paxter and routed the Riverlands' forces, his prestige is considerable, the Maester went on. With the Iron Throne's sanction, it will be difficult to prevent him from assuming his duties. Doran nodded. Caliot, thank you. Leave me now. When the Maester bowed and left, Doran sat in his wheelchair and let the pain wash through him a moment before focusing. Arthur had not told Jon Arryn about his secret betrothal to Arianne, or had he, and old Arryn chose to keep it quiet? Doran dismissed the second thought almost immediately. If Jon Arryn had truly known and intended to keep it secret, he would not have allowed Paxter to be brought there and beheaded. He would have spared even the last shred of a nobleman's dignity. Nor would he have so brazenly handed Arthur the governorship and sent a royal fleet to escort him, or returned Quentyn safely. Either Arthur had kept his promise and preserved the secret, or he bore such a poor opinion of King Robert and no loyalty to the Baratheons that he refused to help them. For now, at least, he was a friend rather than an enemy. If I ever sit in that position, Doran thought, it will not be by favors or bargains. It will be because I am worthy. He remembered some of what Arthur had once said. Perhaps the man could indeed make his words come true. Doran watched the children until the sun slid lower and the shadows of the lemon trees lengthened. Then Ariohodah's voice called from the path, steady as always. Prince Oberyn requests an audience. Doran signaled, and footsteps hurried over the flagstones. Oberyn came straight to the point. Doran, what do you think of Arthur being named governor of the Dorne borderlands? At least he is a friend and not an enemy, Doran answered. He can be won. Oberyn smiled and drew a letter from his cloak. We don't need to win him over anymore. Doran frowned and read. After a beat, he looked up in surprise. Is this true? My daughter would not lie to me, Oberyn said with the easy confidence of a man who trusted his house more than court gossip. The Fury, carrying Arthur, rounded the wrath of the storm and entered Dorne's waters. She should be in Sunspear in a day or two. Oberyn folded his arms and began to pace a little. his voice lowering to the kind of amused analysis Doran knew so well. Arthur thought long about how to get past you. As a proper liege, he would not wish his vassals to grow too powerful, least of all a borderlands governor who might rival him. Dorne's greatest vassal was House Ironwood, and you and I brought them down with a smooth string of moves. The Cow Thief, the trial by combat, the hostages. Once they'd been broken, there was room to maneuver. He smiled. Then Arthur found his opening, his uncle, Sir Arthur Dane, the Sword of the Morning. He'd always been torn over the Tower of Joy, with his kin divided, Stark against Dane, cousin against cousin. That memory, rigid before, suddenly became a two-edged tool. To old Aaron he can claim, "My uncle served the stag, he fought for King Robert." To you he can say, "My uncle served the dragon, he risked himself for Prince Rhaegar." Playing both sides gives him the freedom to be welcomed by both. When the Fury sailed into the Greenblood and came to the southern ferry of Sunspear, Oberyn continued, I rode out with a contingent to meet him. Stannis had no reason to visit Sunspear, and he didn't, but Sir Emmon Florent, a man of the Riverlands, was eager enough to step ashore with Arthur. Quentyn greeted us. "Uncle, I didn't expect you to come personally," he said. Oberyn grinned at the memory. And when we asked about Paxter, is it true he was struck by lightning? Arthur said he saw it himself. The Archbishop pronounced it a sign of the Seven. Otherwise, they would never have paraded Paxter to the Great Sept to be executed. They rode into the Shadow City together afterward. The three curved walls were open. The gates to the old palace stood unbarred, and the streets were lined with people. The walls were shoulder to shoulder with cheering crowds, adults with children on their shoulders, faces bright as if waiting for a festival. Arthur had not expected a simple arrival to turn into a triumph, but that was what it became, a triumphal march. When Spear Tower came into sight, Arthur tightened his grip on the reins. Garlands and flowers rained down on him. Young women pressed forward with blooms, and he accepted them with a soldier's awkward courtesy, even as the crowd shouted his name. They pushed through the filthy outer city, past the second gate where tar and salt and rotting seaweed clung to the air, and the throng only grew denser. "Make way for the Sword of the Morning," some cried. "Make way for Prince Oberyn," others answered. A woman on a balcony called, "The former Peachheart Knight, now the Sword of the Morning." A man close by roared, "To deal with the Riverlands, you must take up spears and swords." A nobleman boomed, "Dorne's sharpest spear." Hoda gave up trying to pick out the voices. There were simply too many. By the time they reached the third gate, the guards had to shove through the press of bodies to clear a path. When Arthur passed beneath the gate and stood at Sunspear's inner court, he thought, perhaps with some relief, that he might not need to invoke his uncle's deeds to win Doran's favor after all. The city had already welcomed him as one of its own. Chapter 223. I'm going to be a dad. Creak, creak. The iron gate fell shut behind him, and the cheers outside gradually died away. Princess Arianne, flanked by half the court, met him in the outer courtyard. Her jet-black curls shone in the sun, and the small sun-copper circlet on her brow swung gently with each step. The straps of her leather sandals, the sand-snake fashion, wound their way to her thighs, and her purple and gold silk robe flowed around her like water. Among the courtiers, Arthur recognized the elderly blind steward Ricasso, Sir Manfrey Martell, the acting city lord, and the young Maester Miles in his gray robes. Brother, Sir Arthur Snow. Arianne strode ahead of the procession. Sunspear rejoices at your arrival. I can hear their joy from here, though most of it is for Arthur, Quentyn said as he dismounted, a faint smile on his face. Sister, you look well. Princess Arianne. Arthur handed the wreath and the reins to a stable boy and offered a simple bow. The sand snakes were all tall. Arthur guessed Arianne and Name were about a head shorter than them. Still, beneath her jeweled belt and the loose, layered silk, Arianne's figure was fuller, her curves pronounced. He thought of Name's suggestion that he proposed to Arianne to bolster her claim. Then Arianne leaned in, bringing the sharp scent of citrus and spices with her. Arthur, my champion knight, won't you tell us yourself of your battles with the Riverlands? The city is already aflutter, but your own telling will be far more exciting. Arianne's voice was soft, and there was something teasingly ambiguous about it. You siblings have been apart so long, you must have much to say. Oberyn's darker voice cut in, his night-dark eyes sweeping over her. Arthur, come with me. Doran wishes to speak with you privately. He turned to Ricasso. Arrange chambers and food for our guest. Arthur shrugged at Arion and followed Oberyn past the welcoming faces down the long corridor of the palace. The place stirred old memories. The first time he had come to Sunspear, it had been for a tourney. He was still Arthur Snow then, seeking a knighthood from Oberyn, his titles few and humble. Now he was Sir Arthur Snow, governor of the Dorne borderlands, guardian of the Torrent River, acting city lord of Starfall, and the Sword of the Morning. Oberyn said little as they walked, only glancing at him with that sharp, appraising gaze. Arthur finally asked, a little off guard, "Why are you looking at me like that?" Oberyn snorted. "You know what you did." "What did I do?" Arthur wondered, but before he could ask, they had climbed the long stone steps of the Sun Tower and entered the great circular hall beneath the arch. Stained glass threw slanted shafts of colored light across the pale marble, scattering diamond-shaped colors at his feet. On the dais sat two nearly identical thrones, one inlaid with House Martell's golden spear, the other with the son of the Rhoynar. Prince Doran occupied the golden spear seat, the captain of the guard standing at his side. Arthur stepped forward, bowed, and said, "Your Highness, I am grateful for Sunspear's support of Starfall City." "Paxter struck into Dorne first," Doran answered, his voice as calm as still water. "A liege lord must always make a response. Tell me, what are your thoughts and plans for the post of Dorne Borderlands governor?" "Your Highness." Arthur recited the lines he had prepared, cautious and measured. "The Borderlands governorship is largely honorific, much like the Borderlands commander held by House Cairn of Nightsong. The Borderlands lords have ancient grudges. They have fought for generations and answer to other liege lords. To truly bring them together, to suppress the wildlings of the Crimson Mountains, to mediate disputes among the three Borderlands houses, that would be as hard as climbing to heaven." Doran listened and nodded. "That is sensible." Then his tone shifted. "If that office were given to another, I might not care. But it is you, and I believe you can carry it out. I heard Jon Arryn may have lost half his teeth to age, but his sight is still sharp." His meaning was clear. He saw more than he let on. Arthur felt less gratified than squeezed. Doran's words left no easy paths. He steadied himself to speak again. "Your Highness, I—" Doran cut him off. "Very well. Be the Borderlands governor. Sunspear will stand aside. You understand the cause we undertake. I have one request. Should war erupt between Dorne and the Iron Throne, Starfall must answer Sunspear's call and fulfill its vassal obligations. You must remain neutral, even if it pits you against your uncle, Eddard Stark." Arthur blinked. Doran's demand left him momentarily speechless. Given how Dorne had acted in the histories, losing no men save the Red Viper, Doran's terms seemed lenient. Still, the prince was not joking. "I want you to swear by your sword to uphold that," Doran said. Arthur found his center. He drew Dawn and, sword in hand, swore the oath solemnly. When he finished and sheathed the blade, Doran inclined his head to Oberyn. "Name wrote to say she's with child," Oberyn said, producing a letter from his cloak. "It's yours." "What?" Arthur stared, stunned. For a long instant he could not move. Then comprehension widened his eyes. "Name is pregnant? And it's my child?" Oberyn said nothing further. The letter trembled in his hand. Arthur took it. Name's handwriting was unmistakable. They had shared a dangerous night before he left Starkeep for King's Landing. 3 months had passed since. If the Count was right, he swallowed. "Where is Name?" Oberyn's mouth curled. "Where else? Starfall City." Chapter 224, Encounter. Coming out of the Sun Tower, Arthur still felt as if he were dreaming. It wasn't until he shut the door to his room and sat alone that the reality settled in. He was going to be a father. He took Name's letter from his pocket and read it again. Heirs and progeny were the bedrock of stable rule. Even if Name's child were born out of wedlock, the mere fact of an heir would reassure the people of his lands and give his followers hope for the future. After agreeing with Prince Doran about his appointment as governor of the Dorne borderlands, Arthur did not linger in Sunspear. The next morning, under Arion's resentful glare, he boarded the Fury without looking back. He refused to play along with her plans or to offer himself as a pawn to bolster her claim to succession. He had no taste for such pointless disputes. The sea breeze filled the Fury's golden sails. The royal fleet followed the Dornish coast for a week. If the winds held and nothing unexpected happened, Starfall's white stone sword tower would come into view in another week. Arthur was playing Cyvasse with Stannis and debating the doctrines of the Seven when the ship's alarm bells cut through the cabin. Almost at once, Stannis was on his feet, reaching for the armor and shield that hung on the wall. "What is it?" "My lord, the lookouts have spotted the Arbor fleet 2 nautical miles ahead, over 40 ships." Mullick, the oarsman, called through the hatch. "They have painted great crosses over the red wine grape on their sails and stern flags." Stannis tightened his vambraces and barked, "Byron, get in here and help me with my armor." "They must have heard Paxter was beheaded," Stannis growled as he strapped on his pieces. Knowing their crimes and their doom, those captains seized ships and fled. The Red Wines let them slip away? This is madness. Arthur moved as quickly as the chaos allowed, nearly running into a distracted Byron in the corridor. On deck, the crew assembled with practiced speed. With Penrose and Zack helping him into his vine-embossed armor, Arthur reached the forecastle to find Stannis already fully armed, standing where he could see and be seen, issuing commands in a booming voice. "All ballistae loaded," came the shouts from the sides. "Pitch barrels ready," cried the men at the catapults. "All oarsmen at the benches." Malek's voice came from below. The lookout at the mast sang out, "Wind's fair. No need to lower the sails." Under Ser Imry's flag, signals the royal fleet reformed at once into 2 battle lines. The front line consisted of 3 massive ships, the Fury in the center, the Duke Stephen to one side, and the Sea Deer to the other. A wing of 100-oared warships fell into the left, farther from the shore. The second line, Black Bess, Sea Spirit, and Lady Maria, was under Onion Knight Davos's command, with a string of smaller 100-oar vessels behind them. "Signal them to heave to and surrender," Stannis cried into the wind. Arthur leaned on the rail and stared at the sight the lookout had described. The sea ahead was a crowded maze of hulls flying the purple red wine grape, but each canvas bore a crude cross painted over it. The distant fleet was a hornet's nest of panic. At the Fury's signal, some ships turned sharply seaward, others slashed their sails and fled with the wind. "They're running," Jimmy shouted at Arthur's side. "Don't let the murderers who burned Peach Garden escape." Stannis smiled without warmth. "Don't drive them too hard. Let them bolt for a while." The pause worked. Ships on the outer edge, watching their allies flee, lost cohesion. Men on maddened decks tried to tack and collide. A few hulks struck one another amid the confusion. At the moment the enemy was unraveling, Stannis gave the order. "Cowards! All oars, full speed. Signal them. Those who hoist the white and surrender shall be spared." The Fury, the largest warship afloat in the fleet, answered with a ferocious burst. 300 oars put it in motion like a shot from a bow. When the bow ram struck, the whole ship shuddered. The iron-plated ram cleaved a flat-bottomed skiff that tried to swing away into 2 like a cracked egg. Water rushed in. Men were sucked under as the little vessel went down. The Fury thundered through the melee. Ballistae on both sides fired into the wings of fleeing ships. Bolts whistled, some piercing through hulls, some driving through men and shattering timbers. Sailors impaled by monstrous bolts dangled grotesquely from masts. Arthur was not idle. He braced on the elevated quarterdeck with the Kirin bow in his hands. The Fury's 3 decks gave him height and sightlines soldiers on smaller galleys lacked. He drew and aimed at a crossbowman, fumbling a bolt, but the pitching decks threw his shot wide. The arrow struck the adjacent rail. Jimmy, fingers trembling on his string, muttered a prayer. "May the 7 bless me. This is the 7th," and released. His arrow found an Arbor sailor and sent him down. Arthur, half in jest, half in concentration, thought of a name from far away as if reciting a charm. Without taking careful aim, he loosed an arrow at a fully armored knight barking orders on a neighboring ship. The missile described an odd arc and glanced off the knight's gorget, catching the vulnerable throat beneath. The man went down like a felled tree. Arthur stared. The absurd luck of it made his stomach flip. This worked too? By then, many Arbor ships on the Fury's flanks were already showing white flags. The Duke Stephen and the Sea Deer, leading the first line, smashed into the fray. The Duke Stephen rammed a galley hard enough to crush the oars on one side, splinters flying as the vessel lost the strength to fight. From the second line, Davos's black-sailed contingent bent every oar, pursuing the vessels that had fled seaward. In the roar and stench of battle, Arthur felt the strange mixture of focus and disbelief that comes in a fight, the sense that luck, skill, and a rigid command could turn chaos into order. The Arbor fleet, hastily gathered and desperate, was beginning to break. Jacob 5, Take a Day Off. Taking a Day Off, Chapter 226, Fleet Building Plan. The setting sun turned the sea a blood-red smear. Far off, a few Arbor-oared warships at the rear of their fleet had slipped through the Royal Fleet's pursuit, small, nimble, and hidden by the mass of ships ahead. They were now little black dots on the horizon. The rest of Arbor's squadron had not been so fortunate. 9 went to the bottom, and 36 struck their colors and were taken. On the deck of the Fury, sailors had finished tending the wounded struck by stray arrows and were now scrubbing the blood from the planks. Buckets and mops thudded against the deck in a steady, tired rhythm. Sir Imry climbed the creaking stairs to the bridge and reported, "My lord, we sank 9 Arbor ships and captured 36. 7 are badly damaged. The other 29 have no major harm. We have taken over 800 prisoners, 11 captains, and more than 30 knights. In the holds of 8 large merchantmen and some wine barges, we found weapons, equipment, and a great deal of wine and other goods." Stannis, still in his steel armor bearing the crowned stag, gave orders without hesitation. "Keep all ships on alert. Until we reach Starfall City, rotate lookouts in 3 shifts so there is always a man in the masthead. Bring the commander of the Arbor fleet, I'll call him the commander for now, to my cabin. I will question him myself, interrogate the other captains and knights separately, find out who else escaped and what remains of the situation in Arbor." "Yes, my lord." Sir Imry fell back. "What shall we do with the badly damaged ships?" "Leave one to hold the bodies," Stannis said. "Scuttle it afterward. Beach the rest." Arthur leaned against the bow and listened to Stannis's methodical post-battle orders and his calm, exacting command. He admired the man's hardness and decisiveness. No wonder Stannis had crushed the Iron Fleet at Fair Isle during the Greyjoy Rebellion. Victory at sea required not just excellent ships, but disciplined crews and a commander who would not waver. Arthur realized how much a fleet depended on cohesion and leadership as the Fury bore south. Soon soldiers escorted 3 prisoners into Stannis's cabin. One of them was a familiar face, Sir Norbert, round-cheeked, narrow-eyed, with a flat nose, whom Arthur had met before. Norbert had served as an envoy for Paxter and had come to parley and gather intelligence. Arthur remembered forcing information from him once. He had beaten Norbert with 10 strokes, left him bruised and bedridden, and recovered the intelligence Norbert had carried. "My lord, have mercy!" Norbert cried before the soldiers could urge them to kneel. "I beg to take the black to atone." "I once fought beside you at Sisterton," the second man blurted. All 3 sank to their knees at once, faces pale, begging. "Silence!" Stannis snapped. "I will ask the questions. You will answer. No other sound." The interrogation unpeeled like an onion. The 3 men, cowed and truthful, laid out what they knew of events on Arbor. Their account confirmed what Stannis had suspected. News that Desmond had died in trial by combat and that Earl Paxter had been beheaded in King's Landing had set the island aflame with fear. Many captains, convinced they would be accused and purged next, had begun to collude with the men who had burned the Peach Garden estate. They planned to seize ships and goods and flee to the free cities rather than wait for judgment. Panic had been the perfect cover. While port defenses were distracted, conspirators set fires in the vineyards and struck at the weakened harbors to seize vessels. "How did you know about the accusations?" Arthur asked. Sir Norbert's face winced. "Paxter? He once had every captain read the terms you wrote." Arthur only shook his head. He dug their own graves. He understood Paxter's intent: unify the captains, bind them with a written pledge, but with Paxter's downfall, the same act had nudged those who feared punishment to run instead of submit. The 3 prisoners sweated and pleaded for mercy. "We have told you everything. The burning of Peach Garden and the blockade of Starfall were done under orders from Paxter and Desmond. For the sake of the 7, have mercy." Stannis's face was cold and immovable. He said nothing, only waved, and soldiers dragged the captives away to be processed. When the cabin emptied, Arthur turned to Stannis. "What will you do with the prisoners and the ships and goods?" "After interrogation and identification, they'll be tried according to the law of the realm," Stannis replied. "Judgment will follow." Arthur seized the chance. "Those Ord warships, some of them are lightly damaged at most. The crown can't afford to man and maintain more vessels. Sell them to me. I'll use them to guard Starfall's coast. And the merchantman with the amber peach wine, let me handle the wine. We need funds, and those stores could be turned to trade. I'll also pay for repairs and hire instructors from your crews to train my men." Stannis ground his teeth, a gesture Arthur had come to recognize as his thinking, and then nodded. Agreed. The royal treasury was stretched thin. Extra ships and crews were more a burden than a boon. Selling the captured vessels was sensible. Over the next week, as the royal fleet sailed towards Starfall City, Arthur and Stannis hammered out the terms. They agreed on a price for the Ord warships and the sale of the amber peach wine. They established a communications link between Starfall City and Dragonstone and laid out the procedure for identifying and prosecuting the Arbor conspirators. Arthur also proposed hiring sailors, oar masters, and captains from the royal fleet as instructors to train his crews. Stannis balked at first. The royal fleet was under the Iron Throne's jurisdiction, and its men were its asset. But Arthur's offer was generous enough that Stannis finally consented. He agreed to reassign more than 50 personnel from the royal fleet to be permanently stationed at Lighthouse Keep to protect the amber peach wine production site and to help train the new crews. With the deal struck, the Fury kept a vigilant course south. Arthur's idea of building his own fleet had taken its first concrete form. A handful of Ord warships, trained men, and a steady supply of wine gold to pay for it all. Chapter 227, Willis Tyrell. When the Fury slipped into Starfall Port, Arthur and Stannis stepped ashore and were met by Sir Barton, who had been waiting with news. The Riverlands representatives had arrived in Starfall City a week earlier. "So soon?" Stannis frowned. "Wasn't Mace Tyrell supposed to represent them?" "No," Sir Barton answered. "The Riverlands party is led by Velis Tyrell, heir to Highgarden, along with Count Mattis Rowan, Lord Baelor Hightower, and the current Count of the Arbor, Horace Redwine." Arthur thought for a moment and understood. Highgarden feared Lord Chubby Fish might set himself up like a Dornish lord of Borderlands and preferred to send the heir ahead to deal with the fallout. Baelor Hightower's brother and many Old Town vassals and knights were prisoners in Starfall City. Horace Redwine was directly implicated in the affair and would be held to account. Mattis Rowan likely came as a mediator. "Have the prisoners been transferred?" Arthur asked. "Yes," Sir Barton replied, waving a hand to summon horses. "The key Riverlands hostages held at Eaglenest Keep have been brought to Starfall City. The rest are being held in the arena." They mounted and rode along the new wide flagstone road into Starfall City. Arthur summoned the Riverlands delegation to the reception hall at once. Velis Tyrell greeted them with a courteous smile. "Sir Arthur, Lord Stannis, an honor," he said. "I speak for my father, Duke Mace Tyrell, Warden of the South, with full authority to settle what must be settled." Stannis gave the man a hard look, noting the leg that forced him to rely on a cane. Why did Duke Mace not come in person or send someone not maimed? Velis's smile did not falter. "My father judged that his overland return from King's Landing would be slower than your sea voyage with Sir Arthur. He did not wish to delay judgment or the payment of compensation, so my brother Garland and I came ahead to show our intent. He was called away to deal with an incident on the Arbor." Arthur watched Velis move with a slow, measured limp and felt a flicker of pity and a corresponding caution. Disability in Westeros seldom wins easy obedience. To command respect as the heir to Highgarden would require twice the effort. Oberyn had once told him that after Velis had been unhorsed and maimed, he had not been embittered but instead corresponded about horses and falcons. Such restraint could be broad-mindedness or cold cunning. Either way, Velis had steel in him. They all took their seats, and Arthur unrolled a scroll. "This is the agreement reached after discussions with the Hand, 3 judges, and Duke Mace," he said. Duke Mace and the Iron Throne each hold a copy. Arbor will compensate Starfall City with a total of over 1.2 million gold dragons. When will those funds be delivered to Starfall? Baylor Hightower cut in, blunt as ever. When will you release the prisoners? After this agreement is executed. Arthur's mouth tightened. Paxter Redwine was bold enough to make false oaths to the gods. I will not rely on the Redwine's credit alone. Horace Redwine's face went as dark as thunder. He started to answer, only to be stopped by Velis. We have raised 800,000 gold dragons and deposited them in Old Town, Velis said steadily. The remainder will be recovered from the Arbor's wine tax, as the document stipulates, and repaid in time. He set his cane down and fixed them all with an earnest look. I ask that the innocent Riverlands captives be released. They were swept up in this dispute and are not chattel to be bought or bartered. I swear by House Tyrell and the Seven, Highgarden will press the Arbor until the remainder is repaid. Arthur narrowed his eyes, briefly tempted to test the man with a display of force. In the end, he dismissed the thought. Velis's words, if heard by the prisoners, would win gratitude and goodwill. Lord Velis is right. I would not use this matter to profit by innocent lives. The innocents will be released, Arthur said. But the guilty will stand before a court. Define guilty and innocent, Baylor demanded. Highgarden's word will be honored, Mattis Rowan said quickly. Stannis added, voice flat, on the way here, the royal fleet intercepted a squadron of ships from the Arbor. We defeated them and took more than 700 prisoners. Is that true? Horace sprang to his feet, fury breaking his features. Those captains are traitors and bandits who betrayed the Arbor. Many are connected to the Peach Garden attack. They confessed under interrogation to involvement with the Peach Garden attackers, Arthur said, unfurling another scroll crowded with names. These 700 plus, those on this list, must be identified by the survivors of Peach Garden. Those identifications will determine who stands judged before Lord Stannis, myself, and Lord Velis as the Riverlands representative. Velas inclined his head. That is fair. Can the captured ships and goods be returned to the Arbor? Horace demanded. Ask the pirates who took them, Arthur answered. He smiled thinly. The royal fleet bears no duty to reimburse Arbor for its missteps. If you insist, Lord Stannis will permit a careful accounting of the fleet's losses in destroying that pirate band, and we will compile a detailed list. Arthur emphasized, careful. The idea of another inventory sent Mattis into a visible shudder. I don't think that is necessary, he said quickly. There is already much to investigate and judge. Let it go. Don't force us to be hasty, Arthur said, but with a tone that left the option open. Sir Horace, if you prefer, I will take the time to see this calculated and explained so no one can accuse us of theft. Horace's expression shifted into a smile that was more a grimace. Thank you, he said at last. Too quickly. Truly, it's unnecessary. Chapter 228. Conflict ended. After agreeing on the time and place for the delivery of compensation, the release of prisoners, and the trials, everyone in the reception hall dispersed. Arthur breathed a sigh of relief as he stepped out. The Peach Garden estate affair, which had dragged on for nearly a year and consumed a great deal of his energy, had finally reached a satisfactory conclusion. He climbed the spiral stairway slowly, fingers tracing the familiar grooves in the stone. When he opened the bedroom door, sunlight poured through the stained glass window onto Na Melia. She reclined on a soft couch. Her once slender waist was softened by pregnancy, and the dozen or so weapons she usually carried were gone. How does it feel to be pregnant? Arthur asked, an involuntary smile at his lips. Na Melia yawned lazily, then complained with mock gravity. I can't ride a horse. I can't touch my weapons. I have to watch everything I eat and drink, and I'm tired all the time. The only weapon I'm allowed now is an embroidery needle. Mostly I listen to the maids and the nuns swap stories, she said, rubbing her slightly rounded belly. These past few months have felt like 7 hells. I shouldn't have agreed to bear a child for you before you left. Arthur pressed his ear against the small curve of her stomach. I think you're secretly enjoying it. Nomelia only pretended not to hear, but tenderness flashed across her face. Have you thought of a name yet? If it's a girl, she'll be Ashara, Arthur said without hesitation. Nomelia raised an eyebrow. And if it's a boy? You decide, he replied. She regarded him for a beat, surprised at his answer. When she saw he was serious, she traced his cheek with her fingertips and murmured, Lewin Martell, my great-uncle. What do you think? Lewin Martell had been Namelia's great-uncle. After Ilya Martell married Rhaegar, Lewin had taken the White Cloak and served in the Kingsguard, falling with Rhaegar at the Trident. Later, Jon Arryn had returned his and peace had been made with House Martell. Arthur took her hand. A great knight's name, he said. The next morning, the audience hall in Starfall was full. Light poured through the high windows as the trial of the Arbor prisoners began. Arthur, Stannis, and Velas sat at the long table on the raised platform. Lords and commoners filled the benches that ran down both sides of the hall, the central aisle left clear. The great doors opened, and a group of more than 50 prisoners were marched to the center by guards. "It's a mistake, my lord. I'm a wine merchant from out of town. I was forced into this," one cried. "Please, you must understand. We were threatened. I only cooked and cleaned," another wailed. "I'm an arbor fisherman. They lured me with wages," a third protested. "Silence!" Sir Barton shouted twice, and the hall fell quiet. Arthur cleared his throat and spoke so everyone could hear. "After interrogations and investigations conducted by Lord Stannis and myself over the past week, we have determined that these of you were coerced and unknowingly joined the Arbor rebellious fleet. You did not take part in the attack on Peach Garden Estate. You are free to go." For a long moment, there was stunned silence. The prisoners who had been sobbing stopped. Disbelief and relief widened their eyes. The guards urged them onward, and they filed out of the hall. Velas, on the platform, looked surprised. He had not expected so many to be freed at the very outset of the trial. "You are more merciful than the rumors say," he commented. "This isn't mercy," Arthur replied. "It's justice. If I preside, I must follow the facts and ensure fairness." The remaining prisoners were brought in batches of 10, sorted beforehand by the severity of their charges. They were presented from lightest to most serious, so survivors of Peach Garden could identify them. Arthur, Stannis, and Velas would weigh those identifications against the evidence and interrogations. As the days passed, the atmosphere in the hall grew heavy. When 3 survivors all pointed to the same sailor as the man who set fire to the orphanage, the accused soiled his breeches. One knight denied his crimes until a companion's testimony was read aloud in court. Then he went limp and collapsed. The further the trial advanced, the worse the crimes uncovered. To avoid any mistakes, gathering evidence and carrying out the hearings took time. It took a full week to finish the trials of the 700 or so prisoners. Aside from the first 50 or so who were acquitted, the rest were found to have either taken part in the looting and arson conducted by the Arbor fleet or directly participated in the attack on Peach Garden. More than 150 men with lighter offenses, those who had looted but not hurt anyone, or had only steered ships during the attack without going ashore, were fined, ordered to pay compensation, and given lashes. Over 30 who had lied under oath were punished by being cut through the palm with a dagger and then hanged. More than 200 who were identified by survivors and implicated by accomplices as having taken part in the Peach Garden assault were beheaded. Their heads were placed on spikes and set along the coastline of Starfall. The remaining nearly 300 prisoners were permitted to don black cloaks and were handed over to Sir Norbert to be taken north. They would sail with Stannis's fleet to King's Landing, and from there proceed to the Wall. Arthur spared Sir Norbert's life and allowed him to wear black because Norbert had rendered a crucial service, supplying false intelligence that had prevented the Arbor fleet from striking up the Torrent River. Horace Redwine had pressed strongly for Norbert's execution, but Arthur stood firm. During that same week, the Riverlands fleet carrying 800,000 gold dragons sailed from Old Town and arrived at Starfall Port as scheduled. Arthur had Fat Karen and Nick inventory the sum and place it in the treasury. True to his word, he then released all Riverlands prisoners who had been held for more than half a year. In the reception hall after the trials, Arthur addressed Sir Horace. "Sir Horace, did you manage to capture any of the men on the list I gave you for those who attacked Peach Garden in the Arbor?" Horace looked troubled. "There were 60 names. We've taken 5 so far. The others are gone. Likely, they changed their names and sailed away. Searching by names is like finding a needle in a haystack, Mattis said. Now that they know we're arresting people, most have fled by sea. As Lord Mattis says, Valus agreed, this matter should end here. Arthur understood the difficulty. Paxter and Desmond, the ringleaders, had been dealt with, and the others who had taken part in the attack had been punished. It was time to quit while he was ahead. The rest of the compensation from the arbor will be supervised by the Iron Throne's customs officials and guaranteed by Lord Velas of Highgarden. I believe it will be properly executed. Then this matter may be considered closed, Velas said. Chapter 229, 1.5 years left. After the fighting finally ended, the Riverlands nobles departed Starfall City one after another. Before Velas left, he lingered over Arthur's purple Zephyr horse, convinced both animals were rare and excellent bloodstock. He even asked Arthur if he could buy one to take home for breeding, promising any price Arthur named. Arthur refused outright. Money was the one thing he was not short of anymore. 800,000 gold dragons in compensation had filled the treasury chests. The boxes were stacked in the storerooms of Starfall City. He was a rich man now. Mattis Rowan, for his part, never mentioned the 10,000 gold dragon breach of contract fee. He seemed too embarrassed to bring it up in front of his Riverlands peers. At the port, where the 3-deck ship lay moored, Arthur personally went to see Stannis off. Having spent the last days together, from King's Landing to Starfall, Arthur had come to like Stannis, reserved in his duties perhaps, but someone he respected. With 800,000 gold dragons in your account, get the peach wine production started again as soon as you can, Stannis called from the Fury's gangplank. Without someone like a red wine to back you, you'll have to be careful. I know, Arthur said with a smile, extending his hand. Peach Garden's restoration began the moment it was burned down. Lord Stannis, give my regards to Lord Hand. I will not betray his trust. I will do my duty as the Dorne Borderlands governor. Stannis took his hand and studied the young face before him, a moment of pause in his eyes. From their time together, the young man's bearing and conduct made Stannis feel the distance of years. When he'd first heard Jon plan to appoint Arthur governor, Stannis had thought Jon mad. Now, seeing Arthur, he could not fault Jon's judgment. Dorne Borderlands governor, he said with a trace of concern. The terrain and the powers there are complicated. The responsibility is great. Be cautious and take care of yourself. King's Landing is far more treacherous than the Dorne Borderlands, Arthur answered as he released Stannis' hand. You and Lord Jon bear the burden of the 7 kingdoms. Take care of yourselves. Stannis nodded, said no more, and stepped aboard. Arthur watched the Fury, its golden sails bright in the sunlight, and the crowned stag of House Baratheon on its colors, until it slipped from sight. For a moment he was lost in thought. In the original tale, it had been Stannis who first suspected that Robert and Cersei's 3 so-called children were not Robert's. He had confided his doubts to old Aaron, and they had begun a quiet investigation into Robert's bastards. All of Robert's known bastards had hair as black as ink, like Robert himself. Cersei's children had golden hair. Old Aaron consulted the genealogies and histories of the principal houses of the 7 kingdoms, and found something telling. Known Baratheon descendants who married into other houses almost always produced black-haired offspring. Convinced the children were not Robert's, old Aaron tried to act while winning allies. He arranged for his son, Robert Arryn, to be fostered on Dragonstone with Stannis to cement an alliance. But before he could present his evidence to King Robert, old Aaron was poisoned. Old Aaron's death marked the official beginning of the Game of Thrones. And now there was only a year and a half left until 297 AC, when that story would begin. My lord, the royal fleet is no longer in sight, Penrose, one of Arthur's attendants, reminded him. Shall we return? Let's go. Arthur snapped out of his reverie and turned from the quay. He had considered confronting old Aaron in King's Landing, but he hadn't known how to broach it. Accusing the royal line of illegitimacy without hard proof would have been reckless and would have provoked the Lannisters. Even if old Aaron had been inclined to listen, Arthur in his position could not make such a charge lightly. Like Stannis, who confided in old Aaron rather than Robert because he knew Robert would not believe him, Arthur decided not to create needless complications. He would let events unfold and use the foresight he had to prepare. Riding back to Starfall City, wind in his hair, Arthur put those thoughts aside. The Game of Thrones, in the end, was a contest of strength. What mattered now was to grow his power, build a fleet, rebuild Peach Garden, expand trade and maritime influence, and bring the lords of the Dorne borderlands to heel. Whether by commerce or conquest beneath the Crimson Mountains, he had to solidify his position as the true Dorne borderlands governor. All of it had to be done within a year and a half. Knowledge without action is nothing. Back in Starfall, Arthur immediately called his officers to the small hall to survey the situation in his domain. "I never thought a misfortune could become such a blessing," Steward Fat Karen said, his round face split in a wide grin. The Starfall Treasury received 800,000 gold dragons, plus the coins brought back from Old Hill and our accumulated tax surpluses. The Treasury now holds 1,120,000 gold dragons, not counting jewels, agates, other valuables, or the stockpiled grain and arms. Arthur could hardly help laughing at the sudden turn of fortune. The old saying seemed true: men don't get rich without a stroke of luck, and horses don't grow fat without nightgrass. His officers shared the excitement, all eyes on Arthur. Arthur raised a hand to quiet them. "Gold dragons sitting in the treasury are just shiny stones," he said. "I intend to withdraw 1,000,000 gold dragons. Part will go to compensate soldiers killed or wounded in the fighting. The rest will be invested in the development of the Starfall territory." 1,000,000 gold dragons? Fat Karen blurted. He was still getting used to the idea of 800,000, and now it was going to be spent, on top of the 200,000 still needed. His protest was soon swallowed by a rising cheer from the others. Arthur let the room settle, then continued. "I want ideas. Think about how best to spend this 1,000,000. "Us?" Sir Barton asked, surprised. "Yes." Arthur smiled. "You don't need to present them now. Go back, draw up detailed plans, and make proposals." Carl Bay, who had come with Arthur from Bravos and established the ironworkers' quarter, felt a familiar thrill at Arthur's words. Arthur concluded, "If your plans are suitable, I will authorize whoever proposed the scheme to be responsible for carrying it out." Chapter 230, Idea King. Soon the room emptied as everyone hurried off, already planning the dreams they had barely dared to voice, hoping to win Lord Arthur's backing to make them real. Lord Arthur kept Carl Bay behind. Carl's face was tense. "My lord," he said, "I have many half-baked ideas, but I think we need an overall plan." The Ironworkers District already had abundant raw materials, a concentration of skilled artisans from many trades, and governance and assessment by the Ironworkers Guild and allied guilds. That environment had promoted exchange and collaboration, and spawned countless innovations that Carl admired. But the district's funds and resources were limited under his administration, so not every good idea could be pursued. He had been forced into painful choices. Lately, he'd focused on one project that everyone agreed had exceptional value: building water wheel mills along the upper and lower reaches of the Swift Current River. Water wheel mills operate on the same basic principle as the trip hammers used in smithies, harnessing the motion of flowing water and converting it into rotational force. But while trip hammers use simple cams to drive iron forging, a water wheel mill is more complex. A wheel in the swift current, linked to cranks and connecting rods and simple wooden transmissions, would turn millstones at a steady speed independent of the weather. It could replace windmills and human or animal-powered mills. Most importantly, it never tires and needs no wages, only modest maintenance. The mills could grind grain and cereals and extract olive oil for the riverside folk. They could saw large timbers and stone for the carpenters and stonemasons' guilds, crush ore and charcoal for the ironworkers' metallurgical needs, and handle the tedious fulling work for the weavers. With overshot wheels and canals, taking a page from Bravos' Sweetwater Canal, water could be diverted to irrigate distant fields and orchards, expanding fertile land along the Swift Current's banks. Beyond the water wheel project, Carl had several other high-feasibility ideas. Glassblowers from Mur had reported rich deposits of river and sea sand in Starfall City's lands, especially along the lower Swift Current, Lighthouse Keep, and Broken Elbow Bend. perfect for making mirrors and panes. Quartz from the quarry near the Ironstone stronghold in Violet Canyon, once crushed and milled, could also serve glassmakers. Saltmakers had pointed out that Dorne's long, sunny coast would be ideal for sea salt flats. The ironworkers' district was bursting with ideas for tools and infrastructure, but most were shelved for lack of money. That was why the water wheel mill had become the priority. Even that project, however, required the Lord's approval to operate widely. Carl knew the district couldn't do it alone, and that sand mining and salt flats would meet resistance elsewhere. Just as Carl was picturing himself hurrying back to the district to marshal the guildmasters and turn ideas into executable plans to win Lord Arthur's support, Arthur stopped him. "If the ideas are not yet mature, think them through," he said. "Listen, I have something important to tell you." He opened a cabinet and took out a piece of black, glassy stone. "This is obsidian from Dragonstone. I want you to experiment with smelting this into weapons, longswords and spearheads, while preserving their strength. Make this your priority across all the guilds in the Ironworkers District. If you can research and mass produce it, every participant and assistant will receive 100 gold dragons. The project leader will get 10,000 gold dragons, a fief, a noble title, and I'll have a statue raised for him in the Ironworkers District." Carl blinked at the extravagant rewards, his mouth hanging open for a moment before he recovered. "This is obsidian?" he asked. Carl Bay had learned his trade in youth and traveled the free cities. He recognized the glassy gleam at once. He turned the stone over in his hands. "Obsidian cuts sharp and is hard," he said, "but it's brittle. It shatters easily. Why add it to weapons?" Arthur was frank. "I think obsidian might be a key to reproducing Valyrian steel. Both the metal and the knowledge of making it come from the ruined Valyrian freehold, where many active volcanoes once stood. Obsidian is common near volcanoes. There could be a link." For Arthur, the connection between Valyrian steel and obsidian went beyond geography. Valyrian steel was sometimes called dragon steel, and obsidian is called dragonglass. Both have special reputations. Both are said to be effective against the others and the whites. Bold assumptions must be made. The careful tests and deductions will be for the ironworkers' professionals. Carl asked cautiously, "If I work on obsidian, may I still propose other projects?" "Of course," Arthur said. He wasn't certain how best to spend the vast sum he had. 1,000,000 gold dragons was far larger than the 100,000 he had once bought in Bravos. He needed ideas and people to spend it wisely. "There's more obsidian in the storeroom. I'll have Nick arrange transport to the Ironworkers District and I'll buy more." "Carl Bay." Arthur clasped Carl's shoulder, Carl being a man from the Summer Isles. "If you can reproduce Valyrian steel's manufacture, you know what that would mean. All your material needs will be met. You'll be written into history, revered by smiths everywhere. The Faith of the Seven might even commission a statue of the blacksmith god in your likeness." Carl's eyes lit up. He grinned and bared white teeth, patted his chest, and promised, "My lord, I will devote myself entirely to the obsidian work." Arthur watched Carl stride from the room. He did not know how much of the vision he'd painted Carl could realize, but he suspected it would be impressive. No master blacksmith, least of all a famed one like Carl Bay, could resist the lure of reproducing Valyrian steel. Chapter 21. Appoint Fleet Commander. After Carl Bay left, Arthur sat alone in the small hall and sorted through the major tasks he needed to complete in the near term. There were three. First, now that he was Dorne Borderlands governor, whether dealing with the wildlings of the Crimson Mountains or increasing his sway among the Borderlands lords, expanding the Mountain Legion was essential. There was a saying, "Dignity is kept at the edge of a sword, and truth lies within the range of dragonfire." If disputes broke out among the lords, words alone wouldn't carry weight without military backing and deterrence. Arthur planned to grow the Mountain Legion to 2,000 men, 1,000 regulars and 1,000 reserves, and to campaign against the wildlings over the next year and a half. Second, he needed to restart production at Peach Garden. The amber peach wine and other beverages it made were a steady source of cash, vital for funding the Mountain Legion. The penalties he had agreed to for breaching contracts with the Iron Throne and Stannis, and earlier with the Rowan, Fowler, and Tarth families, were not insignificant. When he visited Tarth, Lord Selwyn had said the 100,000 gold dragons in compensation would partly go to settling outstanding orders of amber peach wine, the rest to place new orders from Peach Garden. Arthur assumed Old Falcon and Mattis Rowan were thinking the same, which explained why no one had questioned the large sum. Third, he wanted to build his own fleet. The performance of the Fury, armed to the teeth, and the crushing, one-sided naval engagement between the Royal Fleet and the Arbor had left him impressed and determined. Starfall's coastline was long. While beacon towers and lighthouses provided passive defense, an active intercepting fleet would be far more effective. Of the three tasks, the fleet would demand his direct oversight. The frameworks for expanding the Legion and restarting Peach Garden were already in place, but creating a fleet was still exploratory, requiring him to resolve many foundational issues. Lost in planning, hours slipped by. "Sir, it's time for dinner," Penrose said, pushing the door open. "The kitchen roasted a wild boar and a suckling pig today, best eaten hot." Arthur glanced at the window and saw the sun had set, a few streaks of orange lingering. He folded his notes, stood, and stretched his stiff back. "Let's go. Has Miss Name been told?" Jonisa went to tell Miss Name. Jonisa, Penrose's elder sister and the Brahmin heir, now served as Miss Name's handmaiden. Arthur considered. "Tell Jimmy I've invited him to dinner." "As you wish, sir." Penrose darted off. In the small dining room, Miss Name and Jonisa were already seated. Across from them, Zack gnawed on soft bread, eyes fixed on the two roasted pigs on the table, golden-skinned and ringed with onions, mushrooms, and diced radishes, one with an apple, the other with an orange in its mouth. The aroma of pepper and roasting fat filled the room. Arthur took his seat, and Miss Name raised an eyebrow. "There's a rumor going around Starfall that you're going to spend 1,000,000 gold dragons," she said. "Only in Starfall?" Arthur smiled. "I thought it'd travel farther. There was no point hiding his wealth. Better to let it be known. Spending lavishly would not only demonstrate his resources, but draw attention to Starfall." Miss Name looked exasperated. 1,000,000 gold dragons, not 1,000,000 stones. Arthur sliced a piece of crisp rind for her and nudged her gently to avoid upsetting her pregnancy. "Money doesn't vanish. It turns into other things around us. Like this roast. No chef could make food like this without the means." "You always twist logic to justify yourself," she sighed, "and you're impossible to argue with." Arthur cut a piece for himself and asked, "Are there other rumors about how I'll spend the 1,000,000? Jonisa counted on her fingers. "Sister Millie says you'll build a sept to rival the Sept of Stars in Old Town. Penrose heard you'll build a statue across the Torrent River like the Titan of Bravos. The sergeants and squires say you'll hold an unprecedented tourney." Arthur chewed the crisp, tender pork, pepper and spices in perfect balance. He told them what he'd told his men. He was open to reasonable proposals, and they would be supported. Eyes lit up, and the group began to chatter excitedly. Penrose and Jimmy entered. Arthur pointed at Zack, still absorbed in the pig's head. "If you two were any later, Zack would have eaten it all." Penrose yelled in mock outrage and leapt in to help. Jimmy sat where Arthur motioned and asked, "My lord, you summoned me?" Arthur fixed his gaze on him. "Have you given any thought to the 1,000,000 gold dragons?" Jimmy shook his head, a little flustered. "It's too sudden. I haven't come up with any solid plans." "You'll follow my orders," Arthur said. "I plan to build a fleet, and I want you to be its commander." A fleet commander is the heart of a fleet. Jimmy was born into the Sunderland family of the Three Sisters Islands and had grown up at sea. His swimming was unquestioned, his archery now precise, and under Arthur's training, his swordsmanship and horsemanship had improved greatly. Knighted by Arthur himself, his loyalty was beyond doubt. "Fleet commander?" Jimmy's eyes suddenly shone. Memories of the recent naval battle, ships colliding, the Fury cleaving a Riverlands vessel, rushed back. Excitement leapt through him and his pulse quickened. I won't fail you," he said, voice trembling with emotion. Chapter 232, Flagship Design. Arthur wiped grease from his mouth with a napkin. "How do you plan to be a good fleet commander?" This." Jimmy's daydreams shattered at the question. He opened his mouth and closed it again, unsure where to begin. Arthur watched him like a teacher calling on a distracted student and finally waved a hand. "You don't need to answer now. Tomorrow morning, we'll go together to Starfall Port to inspect your fleet. Think it over and tell me then. Also, I'm making your gluttonous brother Zach your subordinate. You two can talk tonight." Zach merely grunted, glanced up when his name was called, decided nothing was wrong, and went back to attacking the roasted suckling pig. The next morning, Arthur and his retinue arrived at Starfall Port before dawn. The harbor still bore the quiet of recent blockade and the destruction of Peach Garden. It felt emptier than before. The fishing boats had sailed out with the first light. Only a few Bravosi ships with purple sails lay alongside the pier, while dockhands loaded tools and weapons made in the Ironmonger district. To the right of those sat the Riverlands warships. Arthur had bought from Stannis 7 vessels in all, 4 40-oared and 3 80-oared. Craftsmen swarmed their decks, repairing and replacing sails and figureheads. Mallets rang and voices called. "So," Arthur said, glancing at Jimmy, whose dark circles betrayed a night without sleep, "how do you plan to be a good fleet commander?" Jimmy drew a deep breath. Zach, full of energy beside him, had slept like a man without cares. Arthur envied that. Jimmy steadied himself. "My lord, what is the purpose of building a fleet?" Arthur arched an eyebrow, surprised that Jimmy had been thinking so clearly through the night. "For now, to guard the coastline of Starfall City's territories. We built signal towers and lighthouses and forged river-blocking chains to resist the Arbor fleet. But those are passive defenses. They don't give us much leverage." A flash of anticipation brightened Jimmy's face. "And in the long term, ultimately to build a fleet that can rival the Arbor fleet." Arthur motioned to his companions and led them along the quay toward the ships. "The Arbor have a sound model. They sell wine to raise funds, keep their fleet strong, and the fleet protects both Arbor and their merchant ships." Jimmy considered that and then outlined his own plan. "We'll need a new port to anchor the fleet and a shipyard capable of building and maintaining warships. We'll have to recruit craftsmen and sailors and begin training them right away." "Port, shipyard, personnel," Arthur nodded. "Why a new port?" Jimmy pointed out the layout as they walked. Starfall Port sits in a cove between the southern side of Starfall City's island and a small neighboring isle. The cove is calm and sheltered, but Torrent River creates violent currents on both sides, which make expansion difficult. For your goals, this port is too cramped for a fleet's maintenance and berthing needs. For coastal defense, its southernmost position is also poorly placed for patrolling the full coastline. Arthur agreed. Starfall Port had limits. He had already intended to establish a larger harbor for docking and training. "Good. Do you have recommendations for the shipyard and the crew?" "I'm no shipwright," Jimmy admitted, "but for sailors, the salt folk along our coast are ideal. They've been at sea all their lives. With some training, they could become reliable crews and officers." They stepped aboard one of the Riverland warships. The sailors on deck recognized Arthur and immediately ceased their work to salute. Malik Devos, the former oar officer of the Fury whom the crew had mentioned, and Eaton, president of the Carpenters Guild overseeing the modifications to the Arbor ships, hurried out from the cabins. Eaton had been recruited in Bravos by Carl By and was among the first craftsmen to follow Arthur to Starfall. He was squat and broad-shouldered, solid as a ship's mast. "This is the fleet commander I appointed, Sir Jimmy Sunderland," Arthur introduced them. "Malik's known you from the Fury. Stannis left him and more than 50 skilled men to help train our crew and oarsmen. You two should work closely." Jimmy exhaled in relief. "My lord, I expected only my gluttonous brother's help. With Brother Malik here, I feel better." Eaton, before Arthur could introduce him more fully, grabbed Arthur's hand and would not let go. He spoke in the common tongue with a Bravosi accent. "My lord, I gathered the carpenters and we worked day and night. We've finished the flagship designs. That 1,000,000 gold dragons, some of it has to go to us to build the ships." Arthur was curious. "Where are the drawings? Let me see." In the stern cabin, a huge set of plans covered the table, 3 view drawings with cross-sections and more sketches and calculations pinned on the walls. The designs looked professional and detailed. Eaton explained the flagship he and the guild had conceived, larger than the Fury, with 4 decks driven by 400 oars. Ballistas would be arrayed along both sides of the decks, and 2 heavy ballistas were planned for the bow and stern. Eaton said the heavy machines were called scorpion ballistas or dragon hunter ballistas. It was a weapon of old, he said. One pierced Meraxes at Gloomgate. Aegon's sister Rhaenys died with her dragon there. It showed dragons were not invincible. Jimmy tilted his head. Dragons are extinct, though. Is a dragon hunter ballista really worth the trouble? I think catapults are more useful. You don't understand, Commander. Eaton wiggled a stubby finger. If you level a heavy ballista and hit true, one bolt can split a mast clean through. On small warships, a few bolts can punch large holes in the hull. Ships take on water and sink. Arthur listened and could not help but picture the trouble an overzealous gunner might cause if such a weapon were trained at the wrong target. The idea of aiming a heavy anti-air gun, if one could call it that, and then answering for it in front of a tribunal made him smile inwardly. Chapter 233. Army Expansion. Arthur hadn't expected Eaton to be so thorough. From morning until noon, sitting in the cabin, Eaton had given an exhaustive lesson in shipbuilding and weapons applications. He walked them through everything, from selecting materials to the whole manufacturing process, and whenever someone asked a question, he answered it patiently. He was especially detailed with Arthur, clearly hoping to secure financial backing for his warship plans. At last, Eaton pressed his advantage and invited them to the Carpenters Guild. There are small models of ships and weapons there, he said. Seeing them will make everything clearer. I know your expertise in shipbuilding, Eaton, Arthur replied, then scanned the others in the cabin. But words alone aren't enough. Warships take months to build. I need to see results. Eaton's excitement froze. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. Arthur let the silence hang for a moment and then spoke. I'll allocate a budget to build 10 100-oared galleys first. Future orders will depend on the results and on how the fleet develops. Arthur understood that fleet construction needed to be paced. Trying to do everything at once would be foolish. Even excellent ships were useless without experienced captains, sailors, and crews to operate them. Eaton brightened instantly. He hadn't got the flagship plan he'd hoped for, but he had work, and if he proved himself, more contracts would follow. As you wish, my lord, Eaton said. I'll return to the guild at once to draft designs and a budget. After Eaton left, Arthur turned to Jimmy and Malik. In the morning light, the dark circles under Jimmy's eyes were deeper, but his gaze was bright. You and Malik should start preparing to recruit and train crews and sailors, and pick a suitable port, Arthur said. Don't wait until Eaton finishes the ships and find there's no one to sail them. How many should we recruit? Jimmy asked. Arthur thought for a moment. Those 7 warships have over 400 oars. For the first wave, recruit 800 people. If the archers who served under you want to join the fleet, bring them in too. Jimmy's face lit up. That'll be 1,000 people. Arthur ignored his excitement and asked Malik, Is training 1,000 a problem? Malik straightened, the onion badge on his chest catching the light. If, as Jimmy said, most recruits are fishermen and old sailors who already live at sea, it won't be a problem. Arthur nodded and pushed open the cabin door. A salty breeze hit him. On the distant docks, the day's work continued. Men shouting in time, chains and pulleys moaning, cargo shifting. He hurried back to Starfall City, knowing others would be awaiting him with plans already laid out. Outside the small hall of the main castle, he heard voices through the oak door. We need a port at Lighthouse Keep to facilitate sea transport for Peach Gardens wines, Jerry argued. Sir Bard countered. The urgent issue is the wildlings in the Crimson Mountains. If we subdue them, Arthur will be Borderlands governor in name and in fact. Even rebellious Borderlands lords will have to respect and obey us. Carl By said, rather than risking a costly mountain campaign for mere respect, I side with Jerry. Lighthouse Keep has excellent river sand for glassmaking and access to seawater for salt. A port would slash transportation costs and bring real coin. Arthur stepped into the hall. The argument stopped. 3 men had clearly been waiting. Most of the fruit and pastries servants had set out were gone. He took 2 blood oranges and a plate of pickled purple olives, peeled an orange, and asked, How goes the obsidian smelting for weapons? I advertised your bounty in the Ironmonger district and tried the method myself, Carl By said, shaking his head. I ground obsidian to powder and following the Black Mamba sword method, packed the powder into a forging crucible. The sword came out much weaker, couldn't pass basic strength tests. Arthur popped an orange into his mouth and ate a few olives. 10,000 gold dragons weren't going to be earned easily. He spread out the various plans on the table. Sir Bard's proposal was, as expected, expand the Mountain Legion. He suggested a conservative increase from 800 to 1,000 and the establishment of a new garrison at Knight's Rest Keep. Arthur handed Sir Bard the expansion plan he'd written the day before. "Execute this," he said. Sir Bard frowned. 1,000 soldiers? Isn't that too many? 1,000 plus temporary conscripts ought to be enough to deal with the Crimson Mountain wildlings. Once they submit, expanding to 2,000 seems excessive. The lords of the Riverlands, Stormlands, and Dorne are always at odds, Arthur said. If we don't maintain unquestioned military suppression, no one will listen. He didn't tell Sir Bard that his broader military buildup was insurance against the chaos he expected to come to the Seven Kingdoms. As Sir Bard read the plan, Arthur added, "I want the Mountain Legion garrison set up at Prince's Pass. It's well placed for supply and will deter the wildlings effectively." "Prince's Pass?" Sir Bard looked troubled. "Count Franklin Fowler won't take that easily. I'll speak with Old Falcon about it later," Arthur said. "For now, begin the recruitment and training." Penrose, who had fetched the food, set the plate down as the men fell to planning. Outside, the city moved on, docks creaking, men shouting orders, but inside the small hall, new lines were drawn. Ports would be considered, mountains would be pacified, crews would be raised. Arthur had set the pieces in motion. Now he had to make sure they all moved as he intended. Chapter 234, The Lighthouse Fort with a Promising Future. After finalizing the expansion of the Mountain Legion, Arthur turned to the proposals from Carl By and Jerry. Carl By had already proven his worth. He had planned the 100,000 gold dragon project and successfully carried out the Ironmonger District proposal. Now he presented 3 thorough plans: a watermill, salt production, and glass window panes. All 3 looked highly promising. From conversations with yeomen and tenant farmers in Starfall City, Arthur knew that milling was one of their largest recurring expenses, a need shared by farmers both upstream and downstream along the Torrent River. The watermill's potential to boost other industries and save huge amounts of labor, as Carl had outlined, made its value obvious. Arthur skimmed the proposal, then closed it. 5 watermills, he muttered, then tightened his mouth. "Your watermill plan is too conservative. I'll double your budget, increase the number of watermills, and resurvey their distribution." Dorne, unlike the Riverlands, lacked abundant manpower, and Arthur needed people for both military expansion and industrial development. His recent pacification of the wildlings along the torrent and the elimination of bandits had restored order and, importantly, freed up labor. Projects that could significantly reduce labor requirements deserved strong support. Carl By raised a reasonable objection. "My lord, if we build too many, won't the existing lords and mill owners resist?" Arthur raised an eyebrow. The development of a new, more efficient industry would inevitably threaten the interests of older, backward operations, provoking opposition. "Don't be worried. Proceed confidently," he said, and began to write an order at once. "I will command the lords upstream and downstream of the Torrent River to cooperate in constructing the watermills. Once construction begins, I will have Rosso Brunn lead the cavalry in training and patrols along the torrent." Carl took the stamped document and examined it with visible delight. His other proposals, salt production and glass window panes, together with Jerry's plan to build a port at Lighthouse Keep and Jimmy's need for docking and anchorage for his fleet, all converged on Lighthouse Keep. Since Lighthouse Keep was Arthur's own fief, there would be no local resistance to construction and implementation. If all the plans succeeded, amber peach wine, salt, glass window panes, a port, and fleet protection, combined, they could turn Lighthouse Keep into a thriving trade hub, a place of boundless prospects. Arthur had no reason to refuse. Still, to be prudent, he instructed, "All of these proposals are excellent. Carl, tomorrow call the master artisans who proposed the salt and glass projects, bring Quentin, and we'll go to Lighthouse Keep for an on-site inspection." He also wanted to see how Peach Garden was recovering. Not long after the meeting broke up, Penrose brought lunch. a few hard-boiled eggs, buttered soft bread, and honey oat porridge. Arthur ate, took a short nap, and woke in the afternoon to find Fat Karen standing by with a stack of documents, looking aggrieved and waiting for him to sign and stamp. Most were budget sheets for gold dragons and allocations of materials, fleet ship construction, personnel recruitment, Mountain Legion expansion, and the watermill program. After Arthur signed, they calculated the total investment, 200,000 gold dragons. Fat Karen frowned. "My lord, it's only been 2 or 3 days. Isn't your spending a bit too fast?" "Fast?" Arthur waved it off. "I still think it's too slow. These are all necessary expenditures." He looked at the piles and asked, "Do you have any proposals?" "I'll honestly manage the storeroom and help with the miscellaneous affairs in Starfall City. I don't have any proposals," Fat Karen said, shaking his head as he organized the papers. Then he added, more seriously, "But I do have a request. If possible, take on more income-generating projects. I've roughly calculated the later costs to maintain the fleet and the Mountain Legion, and they'll be enormous. If we rely only on current taxes and output, we'll run a deficit." "I understand." Arthur nodded. Karen's caution was sensible. Once Peach Garden recovered and production expanded, and the other projects came online, the returns would be substantial. The next morning, Arthur, Carlby, Jerry, and a group of artisans boarded Jimmy's warship, the Fledgling, at Starfall Port and set out for Lighthouse Keep. On the way, Eaton excitedly unfurled the blueprints for the oared warship. The design matched Arthur's specifications. 100-oar-class vessel with a small hull and a single deck so the hull wouldn't be high, a large ram on the bow, and a stern tower with 2 small ballistae, boarding ramps along both sides of the deck. Per Arthur's suggestion, the sides were reinforced with merlons and wooden protective plating so archers could shelter and shoot. It was small, fast, and utterly functional, built for striking immediately on approach. Arthur was pleased. Malik commented, "For a newly formed fleet, this type of ship is easier to control and train. It'll reach combat effectiveness quickly." Jimmy nodded. "It's fast, too, which makes it ideal for coastal patrols." "Then build 10 of them," Arthur said, clapping Eaton on the shoulder. "If you run into any problems in construction, report them to Jimmy and me. We'll help coordinate." Eaton beamed. "Excellent." With crews and ship designs decided, the only remaining fleet issue was the port. Arthur went to the deck to study the coastline. The shore was uneven, land rising in waves 5 or 6 meters above sea level. In the flat, recessed areas suitable for landing, there were watchtowers, left from earlier defenses against attacks by the Arbor fleet. One of the artisans proposing the salt production plan stepped forward. "My lord, salt pans for sun-drying salt would be ideal in these low-lying areas," he said, pointing to a depression near a watchtower. "There are watchtowers and small dwellings in every hollow. Establishing salt pans here would combine salt production with coastal defense, killing 2 birds with 1 stone." "Good," Arthur said. He had already found Carlby's salt proposal thorough. Using idle watchtowers alongside salt pans was indeed clever. "Explain the full salt production process." The artisan described the tidal method Carl had written about. Use the power of the tides, open sluice gates at high tide to let seawater into tidal ponds, let solids settle, then move the water into successive ponds for sun exposure and evaporation until crystals form, producing crude salt that is finally dried. Sea salt produced this way tends to be bitter. To remove the bitterness, it must be rinsed with a small amount of brine and dried again. The artisan's account matched Carl's proposal in general, but omitted the rinsing step. That omission made Arthur realize he could establish a central crude salt processing plant at Lighthouse Keep. Collect the crude salt from the pans built at each watchtower, and then refine it into a marketable product. Chapter 235, Taoyuan 3.0. By land, it would have taken half a day to reach Lighthouse Keep from Starfall City, but sailing downstream made the trip far faster. Lord Arthur stood on the warship's deck, watching as the lighthouse's stone spire gradually resolved against the horizon, its summit flame burning high even in daylight. To the northwest of the tower, an inward curving sandy beach had formed over the years from the torrent river's outflow and the sea currents. The terrain was flat and open, the exact spot Jerry had proposed for a new port. Since no quay existed there yet, Lord Arthur's party lowered a small boat and made for shore. Carl By stood in the stern, poling. "The torrent's flow is nearly dead here," he said, "and the summer sea's currents are blocked by those rock walls to the north. This flat stretch has no hidden reefs. It's the perfect place for a port." Jimmy nodded. "It's nearly central along Starfall City's coast. A port here would make fleet docking and coastline patrols much easier. Then we'll take Jerry's plan and build the port here," Lord Arthur said. "Quentin, you'll oversee construction." He stepped onto the soft sand, scooped a handful, and let the fine grains slip through his fingers. "Can this sand really be turned into glass, window panes?" he asked, rubbing it between his palms. Taurus, a short, olive-skinned glass artisan from Mir, stepped forward at once. "Sea sand is very uniform. Glass made from it is strong and durable, but the sand must be washed with fresh water several times." He produced a finished pane. Sunlight passed through it and threw colored spots on the ground. "Window glass needs metal colorants in the melt," Taurus explained. "I use this sea sand for panes." It was hard to imagine the sand in his hand becoming something so refined and sold at prices rivaling Eastern spices. Lord Arthur tossed the sand back toward the surf and clapped his hands. "Carl, I agree with both proposals. You'll also supervise the salt pans and the glassworks." With that settled, Lord Arthur strode toward Lighthouse Keep. "Jerry, come with me to Peach Garden." Hearing his name, Jerry, still smarting that he'd not been chosen to run the port, quickly fell in beside him. The entire Peach Garden was now enclosed by a 2-meter wooden palisade, with 3-story watchtowers spaced around it. The guards opened a large gate, and they entered. Nearly a year had passed since the fire that had razed the garden. Walking in made Lord Arthur feel briefly unmoored. He remembered Pete leading him through this place, describing the carefully tended groves and the winery's amber peach wine, once sold for 10 silver stags a pot. He also remembered the ruin, blackened trunks, ash-swept soil, the desolation where the fire had left its mark. Now, peach trees rose again as far as the eye could see. The branches were slimmer than they had been, but blossoms and fruit had returned. Pink petals attracted bees. Apiarists and fruiters moved among the rows. Only when they reached the garden's hills and the small plot of graves did the memory of the fire return in full. In front of Pete's grave, Jerry, who had been silent until now, spoke. "Lord Arthur, the peach trees are bearing. The vintners have brewed the first batches of amber peach wine and peach wine. They'll need time to ferment and age for the proper flavor and quality." "Well done," Lord Arthur said, gazing at the grave. The rough wooden marker had been replaced by a carved stone tablet bearing a lifelike image of Pete. Beneath it, an inscription read, "When the winery brews its first amber wine, use the first casks to honor them, so they may know in the underworld that Peach Garden has been rebuilt." A flicker of sadness crossed Jerry's face. "My lord, would you like to visit the winery?" "No need." Lord Arthur's gaze moved from the tablet to Jerry. "You're disappointed that I didn't let you lead the port project. After all, I did say whoever proposed the plan would execute it." Jerry flushed, but answered honestly. "I am, my lord." "That honesty is why I admired Pete," Lord Arthur said. "I need someone I can trust to oversee and coordinate plans, someone who'll see things through. That's what Pete did in Bravos. I want you to take on that responsibility." Startled, then resolute, Jerry dropped to his knees. "I swear by Lord Pete's grave, I will not betray your trust, my lord." Lord Arthur helped him up and patted his shoulder. "Pack your things tonight. Tomorrow, you come with me to Starfall City." They also toured the rebuilt almshouse, linked to the homes of the fruiters, apiarists, and guards. Outside its gate, Lord Arthur lingered to listen. The father allows justice to be done. The mother teaches compassion and mercy. The warrior grants courage and victory. Monks inside were teaching the almshouse children reading and scripture. After a long moment, he moved on to the keep. In the days that followed, his officers brought him many schemes. He rejected the absurd ones and took the feasible, refining them into concrete projects. The plans he approved were these. Gerald Dane would continue expanding the arena, adding rings for wrestling, duels, team combat, horse racing, and even bullfighting. The aim was to cultivate a martial spirit among the populace while providing spectacles where people could vent and be entertained. Bishop Alice would enlarge the Violet Sept, adding an almshouse, a scriptorium, and a library. The almshouse would shelter orphans and widows and provide basic food, drink, and rudimentary medical care to the sick and disabled at little or no cost. Lord Arthur intended this to be a place to train medical attendants and to draw desperate patients and their kin into the Sept and Starfall cities' domain. The scriptorium would employ clerics, scribes, and copyists to reproduce the complete set of religious texts Lord Arthur had acquired from the Archon, along with other purchased books. In Westeros, books are precious, sometimes bought by the Citadel for their weight in gold. These copies could be sold or placed in the library to foster learning and enlightenment. When the budgets were totaled, Fat Karen reported the estimate: 750,000 gold dragons, of which 250,000 had already been dispersed. Karen sighed, relieved the million gold dragon plan seemed not quite as fanciful as it had sounded, until Lord Arthur added calmly, "The remainder will all be invested in fleet construction." Chapter 236, Construction in Progress. After burning through a budget of millions of gold dragons and pouring in more than 200,000 more, Arthur shifted into Sharpwing's viewpoint to inspect the changes across Starfall City's territory. Sharpwing spread its broad wings, gave a few powerful beats, and leapt from the eagle's nest above Starkeep. The rush of air between its wings whistled as it climbed into the high sky. From above the clouds, Starfall's lands unfurled like a slowly unrolling map. The swift current river lay like a silver ribbon. On the north-south roads and across the arched bridge over the torrent, carts and horses flowed like an ant column. Most carts carried building materials: stone, timber, iron tools. Along both banks of the torrent, particularly in the Ironmonger district, construction of water wheels was well underway. Piles of materials sat on leveled ground, ready for use. Through Sharpwing's keen sight, Arthur watched activity near the prototype watermill. Carl By had built earlier, workers moving logs and hauling sawn timber to the new mill sites. More than a dozen carpenters cut planks into house frames or fashioned timber into water wheel parts, cranks, and connecting rods from the guild blueprints. Stonemasons dressed blocks to standard sizes and raised the main buildings of the mills to the stonemasons' guild plans. From bank to bank, Arthur could see 4 watermills rising at once, 3 inside the Ironmonger district and 1 out in the Nightshade Market north of Starkeep. The Nightshade Market's central space remained largely empty, but with the new road to Night's Rest Keep and the old road to High Hermitage finished and the route to Prince's Pass now open, Starkeep had become the distribution hub for Starfall's resources. Merchants and commoners from northern and eastern Dorne came to trade for what they needed. Tents sprang up like mushrooms after rain. Bakeries, roadside inns, taverns, and carriage services followed the crowd. After circling Starkeep for a few weeks, Sharpwing angled south, passing farms, houses, and wheat fields along the road, and suddenly the arena came into view. Originally a conscript training camp, it had become a tournament ground and was now a permanent venue for daily training and public entertainment. Stone tiers rose from the center outward, layer upon layer. Sharpwing folded its wings and rested on the highest ledge. In the arena's main pit, once used for mounted combat, 2 armored warriors fought with sword and shield, sparks flying as blades met. The stands were nearly full, the crowd cheering and waving. Vendors and children threaded through the aisles, hawking mead and pies. Between bouts, singers and fiddlers filled the breaks with music. The whole scene reminded Arthur of the moon pool in Braavos. Almost the same, save for the courtesans and the nature of some of the events. At the adjacent archery range, farmers in rough homespun practiced under several instructors. To encourage archery across Starfall's lands, Arthur approved a monthly target competition with significant cash prizes for the top shooters. He also granted Jello exclusive hunting rights in the Crimson Mountains and surrounding woods, allowing regular hunts. Exceptional archery and top performance would be key criteria for joining the archery squad and the guard squad. Northeast of the arena, a large fenced field, nearly as big as the arena itself, had been cleared. Under Arthur's expanded plan for Jello's grounds, the space was set aside for new events: horse racing, bullfighting, wrestling, and melees. Arthur watched a free-mounted combat match between 2 knights, then sent Sharpwing onward. Passing through the Dawn Market and through Starfall City, Sharpwing reached Starfall Port. Word of Arthur's lavish spending seemed to have spread. Since Stannis had taken the royal fleet away, the harbor had again begun to fill with masts and flags. The small port swelled with vessels of every size. Many flew the banners of nearby Dorne and Riverland's lords, while some, lacking berths, anchored off small islets and the larger reefs south of the port. Arthur's attention, however, went straight to the warship yards. At the dock, where 7 arbor warships lay for repair and modification, an open coastal yard held long stacks of timber left to air dry in the sun, a process that would take more than a month to reduce cracking. Nearby, Eaton supervised over a dozen craftsmen building the most crucial parts of a ship, the keel and the frame. Eaton had explained that warship keels needed to be of the hardest wood available. Oak, used for lances and shields, was the typical choice, but rare hardwoods from the Summer Isles or ironwood from the north were superior, if far more costly. Arthur planned for the keels and hulls of the next batch of warships and the flagship to use those rare timbers when he could procure them. The keel Eaton was using at the moment was a thick, naturally curved oak trunk. Its arc forming the bow and stern rises with little shaping required, an excellent piece. Eaton had broken the work into stages. Some craftsmen cut ribs to match the keel, others hauled and fitted those ribs, and a crew assembled the framework under his watch. The method was efficient. The skeleton of the ship rose quickly. Arthur lingered long enough to take it in, then sent Sharpwing skimming along the coast. In the low flats by the beacon towers, workers and even conscripted farmers dug water reservoirs according to the craftsman's plans. To carry out his salt and glass initiatives, Arthur had instructed Carl By to found the Saltmakers Guild and the Glassmakers Guild to train and attract talent and to push for innovation. At last, Sharpwing perched atop the towering lighthouse of Lighthouse Keep. On the flat beach to the northeast, where the port would be built, several wooden floating docks had already been constructed to ease the landing of personnel and supplies. Construction was everywhere. Starfall was changing, and Arthur watched it knit itself together from above. Chapter 237, Resistance. Bang, bang, bang! The knocking at the door pulled Arthur back to his own senses. He blinked away the lingering edge of Sharpwing's vision and looked up to see Jerry and Cale, Fat Karen's son, entering in succession. Jerry held a notebook. Cale clutched a parchment scroll. Fresh mud stained both their boots. Arthur had put the two of them in charge of coordinating the rollout of various projects and reporting progress. Today was their first report, and they both looked a little rushed and nervous. Arthur waved them to the carved oak table and told them not to be anxious. First, what difficulties have they reported? Jerry flipped open his notebook out of habit. The most common feedback is a manpower shortage across Starfall City's lands, which is slowing down project timelines. He ran a finger down the page. There's also rising wages for hired workers and higher prices for building materials. We may need to re-examine the budget. Daily wages for artisans and laborers have gone up about 30% since last month, and construction material prices have doubled. Arthur chuckled. With millions of gold dragons tied up in these projects, a short-term jump in labor and material costs is unavoidable. Market forces set prices, and he had no mind to interfere artificially, especially since he controlled most of the stone, timber, and tools in Starfall's domain. Besides, higher wages might not be entirely bad. Shortages and better pay would pull workers from surrounding regions into Starfall City. The packed ships he'd seen at Starfall Port already hinted at a livelier local economy. Kyle seized the moment. Good news. Many ships have arrived at Starfall Port. Most are from neighboring territories. Old Town, Old Hill, Arbor, Sandstone City. They came because of the news about the 1,000,000 gold dragons. Just last week, we added over 200 skilled artisans, which eased some of the labor pressure. Arthur nodded. Cale showed promise for an intelligence role. His father, Fat Karen, had been steward before Arthur's arrival and had many contacts across the region. Cale cared for Maester Oswell and handled ravens. He knew how to manage messenger birds. Arthur was glad he'd paired the boy with Jerry for training. Jerry then passed a paper across the table. Fleet Commander Jimmy Sunderland reports the recruitment of sailors has stalled over the last few days. He thinks it's because the fleet doesn't have a name. Jimmy and Malik have suggested several. He asked you to choose. Arthur slapped his brow. He'd been buried in plans lately and had forgotten such details. A fleet name mattered. He scanned Jimmy's list. Sensible options like Starfall City Fleet, Lighthouse Keep Fleet, Torrent River Fleet, alongside more fanciful ones, Snow and Peach Fleet, Sword of the Morning Fleet. Jimmy had tried hard, but Arthur found them too cautious. Call it the Summer Sea Fleet, Arthur decided. The Summer Sea lay south of Dorne and reached east toward the southern coast of Essos. The Summer Isles lay within it. He knew the fleet was only 7 warships now, all borrowed from Arbor, but it was fine to build a name first. And I want a recruitment slogan and an image to go with it, he added, seeing Jerry and Kyle's surprised looks. Calmly, he gave them the pitch. Put it like this. A man of ambition should be like the Torrent River, flowing south to the Summer Sea. Why waste your life hiding in some forgotten hill? Pair it with an image of a warrior whose features mix Dornish and the Seven, raising one hand and pointing out of the frame. Do it that way. Jerry's eyes brightened and his pen flew. Understood, Lord Arthur. Kayla, who still remembered how Arthur had beaten him during smithing drills, looked genuinely impressed. Lord Arthur wasn't just formidable in combat. He had an eye for propaganda, too. Jerry moved on to administrative matters, territorial authority, and profit sharing for salt pans and watermills on vassal lands. Salt pans were simple. Coastal lords hadn't developed large-scale salt production. Most salt was the coarse kind fishermen produced, so there were few vested interests. With fair negotiation, those projects could proceed smoothly. The situation was different in the Swift Current River Basin. Several minor vassals already owned mills. Some were millers themselves. They would naturally resist if new watermills were built on their land. That explained why the watermills Arthur had authorized on the Torrent River were concentrated in the Ironmonger district and on lands under Starfall's direct control, while the salt pan rollout was sweeping the coastline nearly unopposed. Kyle unrolled the parchment. I've marked the planned locations for all the watermills and salt pans and listed the nobles involved. Arthur scanned the names. For the salt pans, tell Tim, who manages that project, that profits will be split 70-30. If a noble provides manpower and their workers help build and run the pans, make it 50-50. Coarse salt wouldn't fetch high prices, but Arthur planned a refinery at Lighthouse Keep. Refined salt from there would be the real profit. He even considered letting local nobles manage pans themselves for a single construction fee. Kyle pointed to the Swift Current cluster. There are 12 nobles affected by the watermills. Aside from Viscount Dimitri of High Hermitage, Acting City Lord Carlo of Braemont City, and Sir Craig of Vulture Watch, the other 9 have voiced opposition. Voiced opposition? Arthur's eyes sharpened. Take this scroll to Sir Rosso. Have him lead the cavalry and summon those 9 to Starfall City. I want to speak with each of them in person. It wasn't that the watermills were meant to be lucrative. Arthur's goal was to free up labor across Starfall's territories. Open resistance to projects he'd ordered demanded a response if he intended to keep control. Chapter 238, Free to Use. Rosso Brunn moved quickly. He summoned all 9 nobles on the list to Starfall City for the very next day. My lord, he reported in the audience hall after bowing to Arthur on the high throne, Viscount Dimitri and 2 other knights have agreed to cooperate with your plan to build a watermill. All the others on the list are present as well. The 9 nobles stood awkwardly in the center of the hall. Arthur let his purple eyes sweep over them and held his silence for 5 long minutes. The tension grew until someone swallowed hard, and Adam's apple bobbed up and down. At last Arthur spoke, calm and measured. Gentlemen, it would seem none of you are inclined to speak up, he said. You all once swore fealty to Starfall City, and yet you openly defy its orders. Have you, in 2 or 3 years, altogether forgotten the fate of Sir Adric of Lighthouse Keep, or Sir Avery of Knight's Rest, who took the black? The mention of old punishments snapped the 9 to attention. Their faces drained of blood. At least 3 went pale, and 1 sagged to his knees and collapsed. They remembered how merciless Arthur had been when the Vulture King once threatened the city. Disobedient vassals were executed first and reported later. Most of their gazes slid to one man. a landed knight named Rad. Rad felt suddenly leaden in the legs as every eye turned to him. He stepped forward 2 paces and forced out, "My lord, we were not aware that building the watermill was your command." A harsh laugh came from the side of the high platform. "Have none of you heard of the Million Gold Dragon project?" Fat Karen called. Panic flickered across Rad's face. Arthur, who already understood what had happened, cut him off. "Knight Rad," Arthur said, voice like ice, "you and these 8 men have joined in resisting the construction of the watermill, openly defying my orders. Do you admit your guilt?" Rad's face froze. Before he could answer, several of the other nobles hurried forward and spoke over one another. "My lord, please be discerning. Knight Rad assured us that if we stood together, no one would pursue this. We were misled. We beg your mercy, my lord." One by one, the 8 accused Rad of being the ringleader, claiming they had been deceived. They cleared their own names and pleaded for forgiveness. Arthur listened, satisfied by their quickness to save themselves. He turned back to Rad. "A noose, or the black. Choose." Rad swallowed and used nearly all his strength. "The black. I choose the black, my lord. The fault is mine, my lands." Arthur's face did not change. "Your lands and property will pass to your lawful heir once you report to the wall and take the black," he said. With that final judgment, Rad took a stunned look at the others and, urged by the guards, was led from the hall. Arthur addressed the remaining 8. "About the watermill. I understand your concerns and respect your interests. If you object, you may come to Starfall City to petition. You must not be stirred into uniting against my orders." They all nodded eagerly, relief written on their faces. "I will purchase the land you currently hold at market price," Arthur continued. One of the larger landowners spoke up bravely. "My lord, we heard that when coastal lords build salt pans, they split the profits 30 to 70. Could we have a similar arrangement?" Arthur was direct. "Let me be clear. The mill will primarily serve tenants and smallholders. I intend to make the watermill available free of charge for grinding grain and wheat." "Free?" Voices rose in protest. "That's not right. How are the mill owners in our territories to survive?" The minor nobles who owned mill privileges trembled. Mills were a significant source of income. Without that, many could not see how they'd live. Arthur met them coolly. "I will compensate mill owners appropriately. Starfall City is short of labor in many places. Mill owners may change professions or be hired to operate and manage the watermills." They stammered, dissatisfied. Arthur's voice turned colder. "Most of you can read and write and have no worries about food or drink, yet you do not know the duties you owe to the common folk who labor for you. Selling your land is your choice. No one will force you." He turned from them to Fat Karen and Jerry by the platform. "For those willing to sell, pay them according to the land they occupy. Have Carl By find sites for new watermills and publicize that these mills will be free to every ledgeman with land in the Torrent River Basin for grinding and processing grain. Announce today's events truthfully so everyone knows who obstructed and resisted a project that benefits people on both sides of the torrent." Arthur rose from his throne, signaling the audience was over. The free mills served 2 purposes: to lighten the burden on farmers and to make taxation and internal control easier. Watermills also made storing and managing grain simpler, drawing people from surrounding lands to gather nearby. Outside the audience hall, the weather was fine. Arthur called Rosso Brune and the cavalry knights stationed in the city to the training grounds for sparring. He unhorsed 7 men in succession with his spear, then took up his twin swords and, slipping into the rhythm of combat, worked up a good sweat, something he had not done in a long time. That was invigorating. He downed a flask of freshly made peach wine from Peach Garden and felt refreshed. After a day spent untangling complex policies, nothing matched the taste of swinging steel. Rosso Brune, forcing himself to his feet and looking over his sprawled, exhausted men, couldn't hide his astonishment at Arthur's prowess. He swallowed his admiration. "My lord, when will you move against the wildlings in the Crimson Mountains? This time, take me and the cavalry with you." Arthur shook his head and wiped wine from his beard. "Don't be foolish. The Crimson Mountains are all steep ridges and narrow passes. There's no place for cavalry. Even if I cleared the wildlings out, I couldn't bring the horses." A young knight on the ground piped up, My lord, we could dismount. Don't be absurd, Arthur said with a half smile as he tossed the empty flask aside. There's a time and a place for every skill. Train hard. There will be plenty of opportunities for you to prove yourselves. And when I truly need you to charge, don't you dare stop your horses. Chapter 239. If you can't beat them, join them. Compared with the victors, who had Starfall City in the Dorne borderlands undertaking monumental rebuilding projects funded with millions of gold dragons, Arthur needed only a curt order to settle his own internal problems. Old Hill, the losing side and the main battlefield, was a ruin. When Quinn Roxton returned from Starfall City after being held captive, he had hoped for some recovery. Instead, the sight of Old Hill left him breathless. Villages along the eastern Crimson Mountains and around Minghuan City had been systematically burned. The western districts were only marginally better by comparison. Minghuan City's reserves had been looted after its fall. Derlenburg, the fortress that guarded the pebble path through the Crimson Mountains, had been destroyed. The Roxton's levies called up to aid Minghuan had been routed and annihilated. Quinn's rule over Old Hill had all but collapsed. Displaced villagers and shattered soldiers had turned to banditry, gathering in the mountains and preying on the countryside. Several septs of the Faith of the Seven reported being raided and pleaded for troops to suppress the outlaws. He had no troops to send. Minghuan's warehouses were empty. Even the city watch now carried crude wooden clubs. Bread, please, my lord. My child is starving. 7 gods have mercy. Quinn stood on the city wall and watched refugees below swarm like an anthill. Minghuan was ringed with desperate people. Keeping order and preventing riots consumed him. From dawn to night, he heard the same cries for bread and mercy. If not for the steady shipments of grain from Highgarden and the 100 soldiers they had left behind to garrison the city, Quinn felt his house might be devoured by those outside the walls. After ordering the guards to keep the crowd calm until the kitchen's porridge was ready, he went back to the small hall in the main keep. He had barely sat when Scholar Hicks rushed in, letter in hand. "My lord," Hicks panted, thrusting the paper forward. "Lord Mace is asking why you allow bandits to plunder the septs and do nothing. He demands you restore order in Old Hill and punish the outlaws at once." Quinn slammed his fist on the oak table. If Arbor had not provokingly crossed Starfall City and brought this calamity on themselves, why would Old Hill suffer so? And why had his eldest son Meredith, his carefully raised heir, died so tragically? No arms, no food, even the watch has wooden sticks, he burst out, rage finally breaking free. What am I supposed to drive off the bandits with? Tears from the refugees. He sank back and let out a long breath. He knew he had to swallow his anger. Old Hill still depended on Highgarden's grain and troops. "We're like dogs waiting for Highgarden's scraps," he said, eyes bloodshot. "Master Hicks, any counsel?" Hicks folded the letter and spoke thoughtfully. "We need to organize the refugees to reclaim farmland and resume production. This relief can't go on forever. At the very least, it will stop them from encircling Minghuan and keep riots from starting." Quinn shook his head. "Even if I give them food, bandits will steal it. Highgarden's men are only ordered to protect Minghuan. They won't join me to clear the bandit camps. And even if we restore order in fields, what then? If Arbor or any lord in the Riverlands clashes with the Sword of the Morning and Starfall invades again, Derlenburg is gone. That mountain legion that wiped out my cavalry has grown 5-fold to 1,000 men. We have no means to resist." Hicks frowned. Arthur has been named governor of the Dorne borderlands. After this battle, will any lord in the Riverlands dare provoke him? Quinn let out a bitter laugh. Precisely because he's governor, he can now legitimately meddle with the Riverlands. Tarley of Horn Hill and Peak of Starfall both fall under the Dorne borderlands. Hicks faltered, then remembered a political move Lord Paxter had once made to appease Old Hill, an arranged marriage between his son, the current Lord of Arbor, Horace, and Quinn's daughter, Lyanna. Quinn sneered. "That engagement has been annulled. The Archbishop signed off on it. Paxter deserves whatever comes to him, and the red wines too." Seeing Hicks opening his mouth to press the point, Quinn waved him down. "I know what you mean. Arbor's not much better off. Divine punishment, betrayed captains and soldiers made to answer for their orders, and that massive compensation. There's disunity there too. If Garland Tyrell hadn't sent Highgarden troops to quell things in Arbor, they'd be worse than us. As they talked, Quinn's foggy thinking cleared. Hicks' next words made him sit up. "My lord, there may be only one path left," Hicks said. "When I was at the Citadel, I studied the history of House Peak. They once held great power in the Riverlands, replacing the Manderleys at Dustinbury, owning 3 castles, even serving as Hand of the King under the Targaryens. Later they backed the Black Dragon and rebelled against the Iron Throne 3 times, which left them with only Starfall City. Sometimes choice matters more than strength." Quinn's eyes brightened. "You mean?" Hicks glanced about and lowered his voice. "Old Hill sits near the Crimson Mountains. It's not entirely out of the Dorne borderlands' reach. If we cannot oppose Arthur, why not court him? Offer alliance, propose marriages, even swear fealty." Quinn was silent a long moment. "How do we explain that to Highgarden?" Hicks answered plainly. "Old Hill is ruined. Mingwan is empty. Arthur's title as governor is more nominal than real now. If we go to him first, we might be regarded with favor. A stay in Starfall is better than clinging here." Quinn nodded slowly. "Thank you, Master Hicks. I'll consider it." That afternoon, Minghuan City glowed with sudden bustle. Quinn personally supervised ration distribution. Refugees' tears and thanks drowned out the captain of the guard's cautions. Before dawn, a lightly loaded convoy slipped out a side gate, wheels wrapped in burlap, horses' hooves muffled with cotton, making for Old Town. Quinn lifted a corner of the curtain and took one last look at Mingwan in the morning mist. On the walls, the golden rose of Tyrell still flew beside the Roxton banner. His daughter Lyanna peered up at him, voice small and anxious. "Father, where are we going?" Quinn pulled a cloak around her shoulders. "To find a new future for Old Hill." Chapter 240. Save the Old Hill from Water and Fire. Under Arthur's careful management, the various development plans funded with millions of gold dragons were finally on track. There were no major setbacks, only a shortage of manpower and labor remained. Arthur sat in the small hall, listening to Sir Bard report on the expansion and training of the Mountain Legion. In a few days, he planned to lead the Legion to Prince's Pass to meet Old Falcon. He wanted the wildlings of Prince's Pass in the Crimson Mountains to help develop the Torrent River territory, both to ease the labor shortage and to complete the Mountain Legion's planned expansion by 2,000 men. He also intended to establish his authority as governor of the Dorne borderlands and make the borderlands' lords aware of his strength. Penrose pushed open the door. "My lord, the city gate guard reports that Earl Quinn Rookton has arrived with his family." Arthur and Sir Bard exchanged a look, surprised. "Who?" "Quinn Rookton, the Earl of Old Hill, the one you took before, has come with his family and retainers. They're at the south gate." Arthur frowned. When he had broken into Mingwan City and returned to Eaglenest Keep, he had taken only Earl Quinn as promised, not his wife and children. Had Quinn come back because he missed being a captive in Starfall City, or had he simply brought his family along this time? Shrugging off the oddity, Arthur stood. "Tell the kitchen to prepare salt and bread." Even an earl warranted the most basic hospitality. Arthur walked out of the main castle across the training ground. 3 carriages stood by the south gate. A group of people lingered nearby, looking uneasy. Arthur's men offered the salt and bread. "Sir Quinn, I didn't expect to see you so soon," Arthur said. "Are you merely passing through Starfall City, or did you come to speak with me?" Quinn looked taken aback that Arthur had come out to meet him. He dipped bread in salt and ate, then bowed. "I came specifically to see Lord Arthur. My apologies for not giving prior notice." The presence of the salt and bread calmed Quinn's wife and daughters. Arthur laughed. "Don't worry, I was just as abrupt when I visited Mingwan City. Let's call it even." "This isn't the place to talk. Please come inside," Arthur added, and motioned them forward. Quinn's posture was low and deferential. After instructing Captain of the Guard on Guy to quarter Quinn's retinue and prepare guest rooms, Arthur led him into the reception hall. Half an hour of frank talk cleared things up. Quinn wanted to join with Arthur, or even betray Highgarden and swear fealty to Starfall if Arthur would promise not to attack Old Hill again. The combination of recent battles, Old Hill's desperate state, Arthur's expanding Mountain Legion, and the uncertain attitude of Lord Chubby Fish had convinced Quinn that Highgarden could not be relied upon. Yet to Arthur, Old Hill, now nearly a wasteland, held little strategic value. The Crimson Mountains separated it from Starfall City, making influence difficult. He had just patched things with the Riverlands and was turning his attention toward development. Provoking another dispute with Highgarden now would be unwise. "I can take your children into my care," Arthur said after a moment. "As for allegiance, my conflict with the Arbor was just settled by the Iron Throne. It would be imprudent to stir another quarrel. That would serve neither of us." Quinn breathed out with relief. "I understand, my lord. Thank you." "Since you trust me enough to entrust your children," Arthur continued, "I ought to show goodwill. If Old Hill's refugees are willing to settle in the Torrent River territory, I will arrange ships to bring them and settle them properly. I will also lend you 100,000 gold dragons to buy grain, livestock, tools, and arms in Starfall to help restore order in Old Hill." Quinn's face lit up. That was exactly what he had come for. "Your kindness will not be forgotten by the Rookton family." He forced himself to maintain composure. "My lord, one more thing. Could you send troops to suppress the bandits in Old Hill? I can include the cost in the loan." Arthur frowned. "Would it not be improper for me to send troops into the Riverlands now? Before coming here, I begged help from Old Town and Highgarden, but they refused," Quinn said with righteous anger, then lowered his voice and spoke earnestly. "You, as governor of the Dorne Borderlands, are invited to aid Old Hill against the bandits to save our people from suffering. Justice and right are on our side. There is nothing improper about this." Quinn's solemn, sincere tone, without a hint of reproach, nearly convinced Arthur outright. He glanced at Quinn and finally nodded. "Very well. It will be as you ask." Arthur decided to send Sir Rosso Brunn to lead the expedition. Rosso and his cavalry had been itching for action. Arthur judged they would not be needed later against the wildlings in the Crimson Mountains, so letting them go to Old Hill would give them work and satisfy their demands. Arthur would underwrite the operation. He asked for no payment other than the right to deal with any captives, and that Old Hill provide food for the force. Quinn signed an IOU for the 100,000 gold dragons. Arthur hosted a banquet for the Rooktons that evening. Afterward, he ordered the steward, Fat Karen, to prepare supplies for Old Hill's reconstruction and told Rosso Brunn to ready his men to accompany Quinn. 3 days later, Rosso's force was drawn up on Starfall's training ground, fully prepared. Alongside the cavalry stood a company of archers led by Guy, over 300 veterans in all. Arthur introduced them. "These men have seen several wars. They are the elite of Starfall City. Their commander, Sir Rosso, is brave in battle. I personally knighted him." Quinn stared at the arrayed troops, their polished arms, neat formations, and fierce bearing. "To be honest, sending these men to fight bandits seems like overkill," he admitted, eyes shining. Fat Karen pointed to a dozen or so carriages nearby. "Lord Quinn, much of the first batch of supplies has been moved to Starfall Port for shipment. I'll arrange for ships to carry the rest to Minghuan City." "Thank you for your trouble, steward," Quinn said, nodding. He embraced his wife and children, swallowing regret, and then took his leave. With a small escort and the 300 soldiers, Earl Quinn Rookton rode out through the south gate toward Old Hill.